Welcome back to the Dear Katie Survivor Stories podcast. This is Katie Koestner, your host. As many of you know, I was sexually assaulted myself at age 18 in college. I appeared on the cover of Time magazine, and I've completely dedicated my life and my story to raising awareness about sexual violence. For this episode, we are truly inspired by the power of sisters and their love. Under the best of circumstances, that love can be completely life-altering. And it certainly was for the Rutgers professor, Salamishah Tillet, and her beloved and equally gifted sister, Scheherazade Tillet. Salamishah was recently awarded a Pulitzer Prize for criticism in the New York Times. So we're going to talk with her about their relationship as sisters and how it literally kept Salamishah alive during her recovery from her own sexual assaults. You'll learn about how they protected each other and how they also birthed A Long Walk Home and a story of a rape survivor, and their projects help to elevate the experiences of Black women and girl survivors of sexual violence. So please listen in as Claire Kaplan and I talk with these two amazing activists who have broken new ground in so many ways. Welcome to the Dear Katie podcast. This is Katie Koestner.
And this is Claire Kaplan. Before we get started, we want to remind our listeners that sometimes the discussions we have can be difficult to hear, especially for survivors of trauma. So we encourage all of you to care for your safety and your well-being. Please reach out for emotional support from family or friends, a counselor if you have one, or a hotline, whatever resource is important to you. Additional information and resources may be found on the Take Back the Night Foundation website, and we'll share that address with you at the end of the podcast.
And thank you so much, Claire. And truly, our episode is going to wow all of us, I think, including myself and Claire. We are so honored and pleased to have with us Scheherazade and Salamishah. They will tell you a little bit about themselves and their own bios, but they are truly pioneers, activists, inspirational, and we have so much to learn from both of their journeys and their vision for all of us as survivors and those working to end sexual violence. So welcome. Scheherazade, could you kindly share a little bit about yourself?
Yes, my name is Scheherazade. I'm the co-founder of A Long Walk Home. I am also an artist and a curator.
Lovely. And Salamishah, what about yourself? What's your bio sketch for us?
Sure. I'm Salamishah Tillet. I am a professor at Rutgers University. I'm a director of an art center here called Express Newark. I'm a writer. I'm a mother and an activist as well.
Fabulous. Well, I think that our listeners, yes, we're so pleased. Thank you so much. And, we can't wait to learn a little bit more about your work with A Long Walk Home. But let's start out as, our listeners come to us first and foremost in their passion for ending sexual violence and often as their own survivorship and their willingness to support and attempt to try to end sexual violence. So, I think our backstory and how we decided to choose this passion academically or with, philanthropy or with our business selves, what brought you each to this vision where you are now? So what was the kind of first and second steps, and what were, moments in your life that just made that indelible imprint that you could, never turn back and you had to go on this mission? What about Salamishah first?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I'm honored to be in conversation with you both, and your work continues to guide our work. And I guess I'll start back in the 1990s, Katie, in the sense of, I'm a sexual assault survivor. I was sexually assaulted in college in 1992 as a first-year student at the University of Pennsylvania. And then again, when I went on a study abroad program to Kenya in 1995. And so I was an activist on campus around issues of racial justice and gender equity. But I think my devastating experiences with sexual assault, and really the culmination of it when I was in Kenya, part of my healing was becoming an activist around these issues. When I was in college, Take Back the Night, hadn't, it got, had a resurgence in the 2000s, but it didn't actually happen. It was there in the 70s and then it disappeared. And in the 1990s, when I was on campus, we didn't have Take Back the Night events. So I didn't really have a clear place to tell my story as I was healing or trying to heal, except for the Women's Center on campus. And so there I was able to, after graduation, write for the feminist newspaper and disclose my history of sexual assault and find safe spaces to disclose and to talk to people. But in general, my campus I didn't think a particularly safe space to deal with these issues. And so I feel like through my healing and through my finding my own voice after college, and then my telling my story to my sister Scheherazade in 1997. So I graduated in 1996. I was assaulted in 1992 and 1995. And then I told my sister Scheherazade in 1997 what had happened to me. And that really was a turning point, both in terms of my own trajectory as a survivor. And I didn't know that at the time. I was just telling my sister my trauma. And then also my trajectory as an activist around these issues. And so I think that moment of disclosure, that moment of a sharing of my trauma with my sister, not only eventually helped save me, but also change the kind of activist and the kind of survivor I was going to be.
My background, I kind of was chronologizing, like doing how I became an activist. I would say it's similar to Salamishah because we are sisters. And so I was thinking about how I developed more so my voice in terms of breaking the silence and being a sister, a biological sister that was going to help Salamishah heal. And so there's three ages that I'm thinking about that were very pivotal moments in my childhood. 5 being one. And so at age of 5, our mother, we were growing up in Boston at the time, and my mom experienced sexual assault by a stranger. And so that was just I think when we think about what are some pivotal transformational moments in my life. And so I don't know at 5 if I actually understood the weight of what that was. I think that was protected about it. But what I did know was the impact that it had, right? Something disruptive happened to our family system that then in her healing process, made us relocate to Trinidad and Tobago to live with my dad. And so things that I knew, we weren't going back and forth. I didn't know the culture of Trinidad and Tobago. Going on a plane, me and Salamishah at 5 and Salamishah at 8 at the time. But just really always knew the impact that sexual assault has. And I just kind of grew up with understanding that, what it means to have public space be unsafe, what it means to really have something disrupt every single part of you, right? And so that's just at a young age, just kind of always known that, but knew also it wasn't, when my mom was sexually assaulted, and it's such a different time, but she felt we were very young kids, just kind of grew up with the silence around it. So having had this disruption, I think, as a kid, and really relocating and then having to travel then back and forth between Trinidad, and then my mom never was to return to Boston again, moved to New Jersey. So we went back and forth between New Jersey and Trinidad as kids. And then ultimately returned when my younger brother was born. And so that was just a very depivotal moment, and just kind of how we grew up, something happening, but not knowing how to really talk about it or process it, but definitely impacting generationally, right? And so as a secondary survivor, understanding how that impacted me. And then I think the second age, I think that I would reflect on is 17. And so at 17, we were growing up with our stepfather, and he was very abusive in terms of domestic violence to my mom. And she had the courage to ultimately end that relationship. But at 17, I was able to do the senior project, and I think it just kind of changed my life in terms of going from like personal stories to then helping others. I decided to volunteer at a domestic violence shelter at the age of 17, and I was doing. I was able to do art with the children that came to the shelter. So it was a shelter that I volunteered at. It had a different storefront, and you would go into it, and it looked totally different. And just hearing the cases and working with the children and using art as a tool, but also being a young person that now had this experience or these experiences with gender-based violence, being able to like help someone, became like a really source. Like I'm 17, but I could still like help someone that is going through something that I went to. It wasn't really until like therapy later on that I really, really was able to kind of transform that, to understand what that pain was, and really kind of really help. And the last age, I think, is when Salamishah told me her story when I was 19 years old. And so I was able to do something different. I think transform that 5-year-old girl and that 17-year-old girl. And now I'm 19, like in college. And I really wanted to like not be in silence anymore about sexual assault. When she told me this, I was, we're very, very close. And you'll hear that during this podcast. We're very, very close. And so, but I'm also her younger sister. And so I kind of grew up with Salamishah kind of, just taking care of me. And, I realized how hard it was for her to tell me. It was the first family member that she told. And I really wanted to be there for her. And I remember like sobbing and as a college student, and her like, as an older sister, like making sure that I was okay. But I really wanted to like be there for her in some type of way. And so I stood in silence actually for a whole year around it, like trying to figure out ways of how I could support her. I went to therapy, and then I got to spend this summer with her, and I really got to see how sexual assault impacted all different aspects of her life. But what I got to also see is how remarkable the human spirit is, and how she's surviving it. And to this day, I think it's like one of the most courageous anything anyone could do is really help themselves, right? And so I was honoring that. I saw that, like that person who was going to therapy, who was fighting for themselves, right? Like, and trying to, even though this horrible thing happened, take control and transform or rebirth this new self, right? And that I was in awe of. And so I asked her if I could document that journey. And if I could go in that way, it was like, I was using this camera as a way to like really just connect and be there in a way that I couldn't do with words. Like, I want to show up for you. I want to be there for you. And this project as like a junior in college, like really allowed me to have a voice when I couldn't really speak that, and really kind of just be there for her, and also turn it back on myself and document how, as a significant other, I was being impacted as well.
I've seen some of the pictures from that project because it's in the film, Rape Is, and they're so powerful. And if you didn't know the backstory, maybe it wouldn't have the same power, but they're powerful as they stand alone. But knowing that, has that particular project, did you have a show at school, or how did you show it in public spaces?
So the first time I did it, it was through a social documentary class. my second photography class ever, and I had this amazing teacher at the time, Steve Hart, and we decided that reaction that I had in the class, like how so many people were sharing their stories about sexual assault, made me really kind of want to do this further. And, I remember my teacher saying, you can't stop here. Like, I think other people need this, And so I then transformed this intimate project that me and Salamishah, did, a photo series into a multimedia performance, and asked people that were close to me. I grew up, my mom was actually a singer, but just that influence of music, and Salamishah was using all these different things to help herself heal. We wanted to kind of transform it, not just from a photography series, but into a multimedia performance where I incorporated her like poetry, which is in Rape Is, and dance and music. And so that was like my senior project that I kind of, and me and Salamishah were in school at the same time. She was at Harvard and I was at Tufts University. And we just kind of invited like all our people there. And we had this show for like 3 days, like 3 different nights. And it was full. And so that made us not want to stop this. That was like, how do we then, as college students, like allow this to kind of tour and be in multiple spaces?
So this was the birth of A Long Walk Home then.
Mm-hmm.
So
exactly.
Salamishah, how was it for you, going back just slightly, to see the original, project? I mean, how did it feel for you to see that?
It was really weird because, think about the late 90s when, before camera phones and before selfies, to have Scheherazade was walking around with a camera that was using film. And because it's such an intimate project, she asked and I agreed to photograph me in therapy, or I was really into kickboxing at the time, or just my apartment. And I was so immersed in the world of healing that you would see stickies on my mirror in my bathroom that says like, oh gosh, what does it say? Love yourself. Or I am beautiful. I am beautiful. I would say I am beautiful. Or
erase negative thoughts.
Erase negative thoughts. Okay, yeah. So she remembers because she took and then I was also starting my relationship with my partner, who I'm still with at the time. And he's an introvert. And so that was also, and then, part of my healing was also being in this new relationship. And so Scheherazade, it's an access that perhaps is a part of youth where you're like, oh my God, my sister. And then my therapist agreed. They're like, okay, like it was also experimental in terms of both documentation and art, but also in terms of therapy. So I think it was, I don't know. By then though, I was a public survivor in the sense I'd published my story in the feminist newspaper at Penn, where I went to undergrad, as I said before. So I went to Women Organized Against Rape, and I had started being part of like a group there to support boys and men. And so I'd already started my activist sensibility around these issues. And then Scheherazade started documenting me. So that's what I mean, like my healing and my activism were so interrelated. They're not very separate in the sense, for me, in terms of my surviving sexual assault. I think the activism helped me believe that a world without violence was possible, even as I'm dealing with the very real violence and trauma that I'd experienced. But it was weird, so that was one thing. And then the performance itself, though, was a different truth, because part of the challenge is, in my case, being a victim of multiple sexual assaults, was just hearing the totality of that story and having people trust and believe that. And so when we do the performance, the very story that I wrote in the feminist newspaper becomes the narrative that shapes the show. So it's me reading that or doing that narrative. That's the opening part of the show. And then the show really is about healing. So that's the trauma. And then the rest of the journey is mirroring my process of healing and hope. So that was unusual, again, because, we'd never seen anything like this at the time. someone being so public about their sexual assault. The images are really quite beautiful, but they're also very intimate. We did series of nudes, series of healing pieces where think in the early stages, I know we added more pieces over time, but my relationship with my partner, a picture of us kissing. So it was a very intimate experience back then. So there was a risk involved, but also I think the level of healing and release, like for me as a sexual assault survivor, after the trauma, it's the shame. Well, I always say it's like the shame and the self-blame that's so suffocating. And so every time we've done the performance, there's less of that I have, right? There's a release of the story into the world, but there's also a release of all of those experience, those feelings that really weren't mine in the first place, right? That was put on to me, but that I internalized as a result of the trauma. So it was really cathartic and also a little scary. And then, you keep on doing it, and more people started sharing their stories. I mean, professors are sharing their stories with Scheherazade. So many people would just come forward and they would see themselves in that story. And I think that was the power that we understood so early, that even though, yes, it's my story, but there's something so important about people being able to speak this truth and then release it and then heal. And I think that's why, I was chosen to do this work in terms of helping people heal. And obviously Scheherazade was chosen, much like the two of you, Claire and Katie, were chosen to do this work. So,
and maybe since we have a few minutes left, can you talk to us as part of that? What's happening with the work you've been doing, and what do you see moving forward?
Yeah, well, I think one thing we're working on is transforming Soars, which was Story of a Rape Survivor, is the name of the performance, into a documentary film. Like you all, we've grown up in this movement, you know what I mean? Like it's a movement that obviously has had different waves and cycles, but we came of age in this movement to end gender-based violence. And so you may choose how. I always say I chose how I healed, but I didn't choose this trauma. And so I feel fortunate to have been able to have Scheherazade, but also Claire. I feel like I used to see all those emails. All those emails. I mean, you still have the listserv. Like I would get them all the time, and it was just, those are the things that like sustain you, because you see people organizing around the country. And then I think I met you when I came to UVA years ago for the Title IX conference. And so I'm just thinking of, and to point to what Katie's quite, just very intimate and very, I'm sitting with this idea of sisterhood, really, because I think it has informed so much of the work that we do. Obviously, Scheherazade and I are biological sisters, but I think as a result of this work, we have found a community of activists, community of advocates, and a community of other sisters who have been, and brothers, right, who've been doing this work for decades now. And I think part of our documentary wants to pay homage to that work, right? Like before Me Too, even before Title IX, right? Like these are important flashpoints for the movement. But there was a, I would sometimes think that between the 1970s and the emergence of a kind of these rape crisis centers and the Take Back the Night movement, and then in the 2000s with Title IX and now Me Too, there was this moments where there doesn't feel like there was a lot of organizing, and yet there were people who were organizing. You just may not have known that they were doing it because we didn't have social media. And so I don't know, I just feel really, I want to pay respect to the past actually right now in this conversation, and just honor that, it takes a lot for us to even be able to do this conversation. There's so many survivors, so many victims of sexual assault, where it's been so devastating that they can't even, they not only are not part of the movement, but they've never really had the ability to deal with the trauma. And so I just feel very lucky to be a beneficiary of rape crisis centers, to be a beneficiary of of different state coalitions that have been doing this work, and of university administrators and advocates and women's centers that have been. So I want to say that hold that truth, because it's sometimes a history I think that gets forgotten. And I think for the future, I mean, where Cher can talk about the work that we're doing with young people that really grew out of SOARS. Like we were taking SOARS performances all over the country. And what we were finding was not only that there were so many college students who were coming forward with their stories of sexual assault, but that there was a real crisis happening in high schools. Before people even step onto the college campus, they'd already been dealing with sexual assault in high schools. And so that's kind of why we started doing work with even younger and younger people. And so I'll turn it up to Cher to meditate on the present and the future.
Well, yeah, I think there's this homage that we're wanting to do with the SOARS documentary of looking back, right, and paying homage to all those that have paved the way for us to do the work today, and to also kind of, especially amounts of women and girls of color, and at the same time looking to the future. So there's like the looking back and the looking forward. And so we're very excited, I think that's what wakes me up every day, is that this younger generation of young people, and to figure out ways of supporting their advocacy and their healing at the same time. I mean, our work is grounded in healing. And so to have the two simultaneously work together, and so we've been doing youth work for now 13 years, and I'm just thrilled and more thrilled of this new generation that are the leaders of our time. So I think about them as collaborators, and how I could just continue to create spaces for these young girls and non-conforming youth to kind of thrive and be leaders in our movement today.
And do you have a specific organization that you are doing this around? Is it?
Yes. So we, A Long Walk Home, we created, me and Salamishah as co-founders of A Long Walk Home, and an organization that uses arts to end violence against women and girls. And so we are going on our 22nd year as an organization. And
what for the young people, how is that happening? I mean, how do you do that? Do you work through the schools? Are you working through, how are you doing that?
Yeah, I just came from a school today, so very much schools on my mind. I haven't been to a high school since 2019, so pre-pandemic. But yeah, we work with different, we partner up with different high schools or middle schools, and basically we create cohorts of young people that we support and do long-term work with. And so each year we'll have a new cohort, but yet continue to support the previous cohort. So it's like a movement. So you get new ones, but the other ones you continue to support, And so creating artist activists, cohorts between 12 and 17 that are coming together to end violence against women and girls.
And this is in Chicago that you're doing this?
Oh yeah, yes. The youth. Sorry, the youth work is based in Chicago. Yes.
I wanted to ask you, Salamishah, and then Scheherazade on two fronts. Your advice first, Salamishah, having been victimized once at Penn, and you said also in Kenya on your study abroad, right? I think you're, obviously, or not obviously, I think you sit with me that finding ways to help others heal from what we went through is a form of healing in and of itself. Sharing with a supportive sister, Scheherazade, this call on this podcast is a healing journey too. Having her love and support means so much on so many ways. But I also think if you could speak to just one other thing that always bothers me, when we as survivors sit in our experiences, I feel like always we can distill the scents, the smells, the tastes, the sounds, the five senses. And I don't know if you were triggered by all or none, from one or both. And what were those for you? And then I think what would be a last cool thing to talk about, Scheherazade, is while you don't have the two experiences of rape and violence that your sister does, do you have triggers? We've never talked about that, Claire, whether siblings have triggers.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say two things. One, after I was sexually assaulted in Kenya, I returned back to the United States 3 days later. And shortly thereafter, and this was really just luck and location, I was able to enroll in an experimental treatment program run by a psychologist named Edna Foa. And so your trauma had to have occurred within the 3 months of this program to be able to be eligible for treatment. And so and so it was like, she's a professor now at Penn, and it's a very it's at Penn, the hospital, and it's at Penn, the university. But at the time, it was an experimental program. And so the program was to treat sexual assault victims for their PTSD symptoms. Up until that point, such a treatment program was only used on Vietnam vets. And so there was this, now it makes sense, of course, like sexual assault victims also experience PTSD. But this was, again, in like 1995. So it was really, really early in this kind of thinking. And so for a semester, I would, and it's really kind of, if you know Philadelphia, I would leave Penn's campus, go to the Veterans Hospital, and take a bus that would go between the Veterans Hospital in Philadelphia to MCP, which is the Medical College of Philadelphia, Medical College of Pennsylvania. And I would sit in this therapy program with two therapists, and I would tell my story over and over and over again, particularly my story of sexual assault in Kenya. And so part of the reason why they had me repeat the story was to treat these triggers. So, as a sexual assault victim, as you were talking about, Kay, there's so many ways in which a smell or a scent or a song can trigger and pull you right back to that moment where you're completely powerless and paralyzed. And so not only did I have to tell the story over and over again, I had to listen to the story over and over again. And then I would do these kind of, like, what was I afraid of? So I'd be afraid of walking on campus and, after sunset. And so I'd have to go walk on campus after sunset and document a detail in kind of a diary form how I felt. And so I think for me, being in that program at such a pivotal moment enabled me to be able to tell my story in a way that I think it's really hard for lots of survivors. Now, it was an experimental program, and it was for a semester long. So what I didn't realize after I left that program was, one, I still hadn't dealt with my other trauma from first year of college. So I still was still in the process of healing. It helped me deal with like the immediate symptoms, like flashback, nightmares, things like that. But I still had the long-term trauma of both sexual assaults that I needed to deal with. And for me, one of the biggest ones, and continues to be, is struggling with my body image. And we talked about this in the performance as part of my storytelling there. I suffered from body dysmorphia and eating disorders. And so those are kind of ongoing. If there's any stressor or any trigger still, I immediately start hating my body. And that is a byproduct of sexual assault. I wasn't a girl. I was a very athletic girl. I didn't have a lot of body image issues, but I remember the moment that I started hating my body was the night that I was sexually assaulted in Nairobi, Kenya. And in that moment, I just didn't want my body to be mine. And so that's something that I continue to struggle with. I can't say that, we live in a society where there's lots of pressures and policing of women's bodies. But it's an ongoing process for me. I think my recovery time is quicker. So that's one, I think, in terms of just body image. And wonderfully, when I was pregnant with both of my children, I did not but Scheherazade, I remember thinking, was concerned because that is it could be, there's so much happening to your body that you don't have control over, that it's oftentimes a big trigger for survivors. But I actually really embraced the experience and didn't feel triggered in that way. But I also think another big trigger for me are these really big moments of injustice, right? When, you have these cases that come forward in the news and people get away with this violence. It's still a trigger for me because I also went to the police in 1997. So after I'd come back from Nairobi, Kenya, after I started going to therapy, I wanted to see, I was within the 5-year statute of limitations in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, for my sexual assault my first year of college. And so I went to the sex crimes unit and I went to the DA, and it was interesting because the assistant DA at the time told me he believed my story, but that at the time of the assault, no means no was not a legal definition of rape in Pennsylvania. And so just this idea that you can be raped and it not be legally considered rape when you in fact did not want the experience, I think it always is a trigger for me when I'm watching really very national stories about people's experience, and you just see this complete form of injustice. For example, with the Cosby case, I think when he's found guilty and then he's released, that's a trigger. I mean, it's hard to say that's not a trigger at all. So I think I still have triggers. I mean, I think, Katie, it's important to acknowledge, even as far away as we are from our sexual assaults, that we still grapple with it. I think for me, because I've had a lot of resources, I've had a lot of time to work on myself, my recovery is quicker. And I know it's a trigger, right? Like, I mean, that's like part of it. You don't even know. Sometimes people don't know what triggers are triggers. It just feels like our bodies and our minds are responding to a threat, when sometimes it's a real threat and oftentimes it may not be. It's a reminder of something that was once a real threat. So
that's a good point, that triggers, there's always something. It doesn't just go away, even if you learn to manage the triggers or the reactions to the triggers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Scheherazade, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of sexual assault, I feel like there's other triggers that happen in terms of just like being in the skin as a Black woman. I was in terms of all the injustices, but as a significant other, I think this is the thing that led me to go into therapy. I did therapy around like the childhood work, but really to become a little bit more solid as a helper to help others. I was when Salamishah told me her story, I was really like experiencing some PTSD symptoms. I remember being in a creative writing class and writing the story about myself and, like, am I next? I remember the words I wrote, like, this happened to my mom, this happened to my sister. Like, does that mean that's going to happen to me? And just being like really like fearful about my safety. And I remember the comments on like the paper. He was like, this is good. But I think you should go to therapy, like, and so I can't imagine, I don't really remember too much what that paper was, but I remember it probably was like this really, I was probably full out in a trigger, and writing about it, like, am I next? Am I next? And so that really led me to go to therapy. I also took RAD classes, rape defense classes, as a way of like trying to control the situation and reduce some of my fears. And that was the original like soundtrack that we used on the in the performance, was like that no, but it like allowed me a training, to really allow the verbalness of it, I think, was the most important thing I got from that, right? Because we can't sometimes control the scenario. We can't control the scenarios, but what we can do is like take some of that, the power of the words, and really like, I don't know, kind of tangling off, but like doing therapy and rape defense class, those were like critical things I like really did try to do to reduce this am I next kind of, what does it mean to have this kind of history and then have someone so close to you? And then, also people are telling me stories. You become a person when you do this work and you're saying, oh, I'm doing a senior project, you become this person on campus to hold these stories.
It's interesting that you should talk about that, because that vicarious trauma that you're talking about is so common, but most people who are family members or close friends or whoever to survivors or people who've experienced trauma of other kinds, and then you bring in the other traumas you experienced that you experience every day, the trauma of racism or the trauma of whatever the other issues are that may impact, knowing your mom had this experience, those things, we don't even think about how they combine together and to affect our mental health until something happens. It's like a teacher writing a note on a paper saying, gee, I think you should have therapy. It just those kinds of things that sometimes it takes another person to say, hey, I understand why that you're doing this, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be that way. And the other piece of also occurs to me as you're both talking, that people who throw themselves wholly into this work or other forms of anti-oppression work experience high burnout. And I am wondering, in addition to the things you mentioned, Salamishah, about triggers and managing them, how do you maintain and keep your vigor? As one person, a friend of mine said once, how do you keep your vigor, keep your spirits going, and so you can continue the work? What feeds your soul?
Yeah, I think Cher and I have, because we do the work differently, so we'll have very different answers. I guess I remember being in a conversation with, I'm trying to remember her name, from Colombia, and she did the protest with the mattress. Emma Selkowitz. Yeah, so it's Emma Selkowitz. We were on a Melissa Harris Perry show, and this was like right when she was at the protest that she was doing was gaining a lot of attention. And I remember speaking off camera, and she was really concerned at the time that this would be the defining moment of her life, right? Like she's an artist actually. And so it was impossible for her at that moment to imagine how you can integrate the story into your life and then live a full existence, right? And so, of course, she was just graduating from college. Like, it makes complete sense. But I also remember thinking, like, it was interesting to me because I think for me, my sexual assault has shaped so much of how I do the work, how I do my academic scholarship, how I do my activism, how I do my creative writing. But I also think because I've had all these other spaces to grow and develop, that it isn't the single most defining feature, but it's one of many parts of me. And so I think that's, for me, been a way of sustaining the work, in a sense, growing the parts of me, and then continuing to fuel my sense of justice and my desire for no one ever to be sexually assaulted again through my organizing. So I feel like I've been very lucky to find, like I said earlier, souls who've been chosen to do this work, or who've chosen to do this work and do it in community and do it in family, as well as have this shape my work in other areas, but it not be the single defining part of it. I mean, that's for me, because I think I probably would have burned out by now. And also I just have like Scheherazade and A Long Walk Home. I mean, being in an organization that we co-created in 2003, and just seeing this blossoming of the movement, part of it's like, we couldn't have imagined Me Too. We were trying to create Me Too, but and so I think that also just being able to witness this moment, and there's so much work left to be done, and there's so much more work to do. But I also want to acknowledge the fact that we are at a very different moment around these issues. And I think the work that we've all done together here has contributed to this unprecedented moment in human history. So that gives me inspiration, and that keeps me going as well. So, Cher, what's your answer?
Ooh, that was a good one, Salamishah. I mean, I don't think my answer is so far from your answer. I mean, I think that like community is really, really, really important to doing this work. The sisterhood that we kind of talked about. And so I'm kind of like blessed to have all of these like mentors and mentees and have a community that I work with at a long walk home that is so grounded in care practices and humans, like, you know, like just us like relating and understanding where we are and having like real, like a family. Like it feels like we've developed a real family of some practices. And so I think that has sustained me. I think that art, like we do this work very holistically. And so part of that is like being able to go in different spaces of the work, I think is like really helpful, like going into the art world, you know, and then going into gender-based violence world and going to a racial justice world. Like that's all one day for me right now. Like I've been able to go from high school to talk about sexual assault to then go to in my day with like Black Lives Matters and talk about like some of the racial injustices that are happening as well. And then just like make sure that I'm going with like friends like that, you know, like that I'm not alone going to these spaces, and then being able to say no to something too, you know, like, oh, I can't do that today. So I've learned to like take off, and Salamishah has two wonderful little children that I'm absolutely in love with, that give me so much joy, that remind you of, you know, just remind you, it's simple, like, you know, like that that there's more to this, you know, that they are like the future and give me so much hope. And so I just able to kind of go in and out of these spaces, I think, that are important to me, and also nourish my creativity at the same time. And so having that balance, I think, of advocacy and healing and of care. And so care personally, but also just community care at the same time too. So I think that's just really that model has been helpful for me. And I think we talked about this earlier. I think for me, one of the most transformational moments was our brother passing from cancer. And that really shifted, I think, like how this movement is here, but also you can leave it and you can come back to it, you know, and really just made me ground myself in like what my values are, what's really important. And so I think if I have those things as my foundation, and that other things don't bother me the same. Yeah.
So you were essentially, Scheherazade, saying that you sort of took charge of the things of how you wanted to do your work, and that you actually had more control over kind of your responses to it and how you wanted to experience it, instead of having those things happening to you and carrying you along, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I knew what life meant differently. Mm-hmm. I didn't see that coming, you know, and that means I don't know when things will come. And so that created a different purpose of enjoying the life that I have right now and being more in the present, and more purposeful with what I do.
All right. This has been an amazing Dear Katie podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. And I close out for Claire to care for our survivors, our listeners.
We're so grateful to all of you who joined us for this episode of Dear Katie Survivor Stories. And thank you to our guests, Salamishah and Scheherazade Tillet. You were amazing. And I know that for our listeners, if they, as a result of this conversation, feel they need additional support but don't know where to find it, please visit takebackthenight.org for a list of resources and how to reach our legal support hotline. And you can also help other survivors by subscribing to the podcast and sharing it far and wide. Please share this episode with your friends. Please consider posting it on your social media and make sure to follow us on ours. Dear Katie is completely produced by an amazing group of volunteers, so we thank them as well, and thank you listeners for being present today. Always remember, self-care is essential to healing and to thriving.